Good morning, New Covenant World. I want to discuss with you Matthew 24 and especially verse 28, where it discusses where the carcass after the tribulation and the eagles gathered around the carcass, and we know that which Christ prophesied about was a description of the end of Old Covenant Israel and the destruction of the temple. And we're trying to equate that spiritually. It's a description of the dead church, or may well be. As I said, it describes the end of Old Covenant Israel and the destruction of the temple in the natural. And in the spiritual, the carcass may well describe the dead church that is to come, or may even be already dead in God's eyes. We draw upon these parallels in spiritual discernment to recognize the duality of these events. I may be off mark as to make that comparison, but I thought I'd share with you anyway to see what your thoughts are. The journey of spiritual Israel is somewhat similar to that of natural Israel, going through the wilderness, delivered from the hands of the enemy, going through the wilderness, and into the promised land, etc., etc. And natural Israel also had a similar journey. Spiritual Israel also had a similar journey, or is on a similar journey. So that which was will be again. So that which happened in the natural, as Andrews A. Belair quite often talks about, will happen again spiritually. And I hope some of you might be able to shed some light and adjust what I'm trying to share with you as to any validity or not. The carcass of the dead church is what will be left in ruins, as it says in Matthew, in order that Matthew 28 puts it, when the arrival of Christ happens in an instant, in a moment, not many may miss or not even recognize as happening, which is very important, I think, because whilst we're looking out at the world, what's happening, the events happening in the spirit will overtake many and will happen in an instant, and they'll be caught out. And the death of the church will be seen and brought about by God in times of judgment, its ruins smouldering and smoke rising from its ashes. This will be understood by all as God's judgment when the world comes against the church. And I'm not confident about this being the reality, but I'm leaning towards that way is what's going to happen. The world sees a dead church already. It's already dead in the eyes of the world and has no standing, nor has any value to mankind's New World agenda. It has no place in the New World order of things. The Lord describes his appearing like lightning, and we know lightning flashes in an instant, in a moment, from one end of the earth to the other, or one particular east to west, etc. And this is how the Lord will be seen, will be understood. Not literally in the flesh, but understood and perceived in the hearts and minds of all. The whole of church will be brought to ruin in an instant, just like it was in the natural. It will be caught cold. And in its judgment, not a stone will be left standing. And this may have already happened spiritually in God's eyes. And God will use the world to bring about its destruction. Meaning, it don't exist in the world's eyes. It has no, as I said, has no place or value. And thankfully, those heeding God's call to get out from among it so as not to share its sins, heard the call and separated themselves for when the judgment comes upon the church. Now, how that will happen, I don't exactly know. It may well be the Catholic Church it's talking about, or Christianity as a whole, as a body, brought to ruin because of its sin, no longer fit for purpose. The world will stand by and let it happen. I've no make no bones about that. They won't stop it happening when the end comes, shaking their heads and saying, "Tut tut, what a shame! The end of church, the end of Christianity." Then go on its merry way to follow its agenda. But this isn't the end of the drama, because among those events, which will include persecution of all who profess Christ, will be Christ himself manifest in the sons and daughters, gathered as eagles amongst the ruins of the church, which I've just said may have already happened spiritually in God's eyes. I don't know. Many are waiting for the destruction of the world who are in these counterfeit kingdoms. And they don't understand that the destruction comes to the church first. Fire and hailstone poured out upon it, judgment poured out upon the church for the sake of the elect who separate themselves from it. Those declared righteous will have and will be delivered from that event happening, because they heeded Christ's call to separate themselves from the harlot church. And a wicked generation seeks signs for these things to happen. But many of them, if not most, will miss this moment or this event when it takes place. It will overtake them, as the days will be cut short for the sake of those elect. And this is why there are those sounding warnings from the watchtowers, sounding out warnings of the enemy coming, sneaking up like a thief in the night upon the church. And just like in the days of Noah, many in the church take no note. They think they're in a good place. They think they're in a place of secure place in those counterfeit kingdoms, and not heeding the call or Christ's call to quit touching the unclean thing, to get out from among them. They haven't been able to discern or understand that the very thing that they are in is the unclean thing, and judgment is upon the church first because of its iniquity, because of false doctrines. The carcass of the church will cause much weeping and gnashing of teeth from those who put their trust in those assemblies and all the different doctrines that have been allowed to be portrayed throughout the generations in these places of worship, which don't belong to God. And as I've said many times, God doesn't dwell in man-made buildings or in anything made of bricks and mortar. He dwells in you. And in their pride they proclaim these dens of iniquity the dwelling place of God, just like natural Israel did back in the 1st century. They put their trust in the temple. So where the carcass is, the eagles gather with the spirit of truth. Not in the ruins that many put their trust in, but the truth is with the eagles who are not in the ruins, who will separate themselves and so do not partake in the destruction of the church that is to come in some form or fashion or other, which I'm yet to fully understand at this moment in time. So I'm hoping some of you might be able to shed some light on that as to how this might happen. I don't know. And as I said earlier, it may have already happened in God's eyes spiritually. The church has been spiritually dead for a long, long time, with all the false teachings and doctrines. And every unclean spirit being allowed to dwell in those places of iniquity in which God does not make his home or his abode. Peace and love.